up into heaven. Then they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they stayed continually at the temple praising God. So he writes this orderly account. What is the final thing he talks about in that first book? Is ascension, right? It's being raised up into heaven before their very eyes. Now, you got your fingers in Acts chapter 1? So he writes that first book. He finishes. It's an orderly account. It goes from his birth. It ends with the ascension. Now you turn to Acts chapter 1. You pick it up. He begins to talk about what he did in his former book. And what's the very first thing he begins to talk about? Jesus' ascension into heaven, right? Now Jesus was taken up before their very eyes, as it says in verse 9. Now, I want you to think about this a little bit. Why would Luke end his first book with the ascension and begin his next book with the ascension? Hopefully it's obvious, right? There's something about that's very important. Maybe for Luke it's like a turning point. And I want you to look at the words particularly of verse 1. It says here in Acts chapter 1, "In my former book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and to teach." Now, that's interesting. I mean, it went from his birth all the way to his ascension. And he says this, "I wrote to you about all that Jesus began to do and to teach." What's the implication? That as you begin to read forward, Jesus is going to continue to do things. That he's going to continue to teach things. And the turning point is the story of Jesus ascending into heaven. So there's this beginning. He started doing some things that you found in my former book. Now I want to tell you the rest of the story. And the turning point, if you will, is Jesus' ascension. And I want you to pay attention to the fact that according to the way Luke thinks about things, even though Jesus ascended into heaven, he's still what? He's still at work. He's still doing things. He's still teaching things. And as you begin to read forward in the book of Acts, you get the sense of all the things that Jesus is doing and teaching. And the book of Acts leaves off in such a way as to leave the impression that he is still, to this very day, doing things, teaching things at work. That's important to just, okay, you've got that in your filing cabinet, right? This is the turning point. There's something so important that happens here when he raises into heaven. And for Luke, he sees this, okay, that was the beginning. Now I want to tell you, here's when it really gets going. You see that? Okay, next thing that I want to just draw to your attention here. I want to, if I can, do it this way. You don't have to look it up. There is a story in Matthew chapter 26 before Jesus goes to the cross. He is together with his disciples sharing a meal. And most of you will remember this story. There is a woman who comes in carrying a very expensive jar of perfume. She takes it out, she breaks it, and anoints Jesus with the perfume. As you read this story, the disciples are angry about what's happened. In fact, the Bible in chapter 26 of Matthew uses this word, that they were indignant with what she was doing. And when Jesus sees that his disciples are so indignant with what they're doing, he says something to them. I'm going to put those words here on the screen, and I want us to just begin to think about how we're going to put this together in our minds. Here's what he says to them. He says, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me." Then he says, "The poor you'll always have with you, but you will not always have me." You've heard these words before? Now, a lot of Christians, they concentrate on that first part of what Jesus says, the poor you'll always have with me, with you. I mean, I hear Christians quoting this verse all the time, the poor you're always going to have with you. But we sometimes forget about what Jesus said next, and I want to just concentrate on those words. Jesus says, "But you will not always have me." Time's going to come, Jesus says, where you're not going to have me. It's not going to be like this, where I'm in your presence. You will not always have me. And this isn't the only place in the Bible where Jesus says something like this. I'll give you another example from the Gospel of John. Jesus says this in John's Gospel, "My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, just as I have told the Jews. So I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come." Like at some point, disciples, I want you to understand this, you will not always have me with you. So there's several points where Jesus along the way says that. Now, that's Matthew chapter 26. The poor you'll always have with you, but you will not always have me. 2 chapters later, chapter 28, Jesus, after the resurrection, gathers his disciples. We actually talked about this last week. And he gives them the Great Commission. And I want to now, you've heard these words, you'll not always have me with you. I want you to now listen to these words of the Great Commission. Jesus comes to them, he says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always. Wait a second. Okay, right? You'll not always have me with you. 2 chapters later, I am with you always to the very end of the age. How do we put those together? Several points of the gospel, he says, you won't always have me with you. But at the very end, he says, you'll have me with you always, right to the very end of the age. How do we put that together in our mind? How do we unpack this? Is Jesus with us? Is he not with us? I want to think about that today and unpack it as we start marching toward those 2 profound ideas. While you're thinking about that, let me talk about something else. If you are in your life going through a crisis, and either now or at some other time, I would say one of the deepest human needs that you will experience at that time, and it can be any kind of crisis. Maybe somebody's been diagnosed, maybe somebody's just died, maybe you're really worried about something, maybe there's a divorce looming, maybe there's something with a child that's not right, maybe there's something financial, a loss of a job, whatever it is. When you're in the midst of that crisis, I will say one of the deepest human needs you'll have is this: the need to talk to somebody about it. I would say at that moment when you're going through whatever it is that you're going through, at some point way deep down, you will have this need, which is built in by God, a need to communicate what you're going through, what you're suffering, how things are with you. And I would say in the absence of having somebody that you can turn to, like a best friend or a confidant, in the absence of that, you will try to reach out however you possibly can. In fact, I was just this last week looking at some various different internet chat rooms or forums where people who are going through crises come. And I thought I'd just bring some of these with me today. I'd like to just read them to you. The first one comes from a 17-year-old girl who calls herself Confused Jen. And this is what she wrote. She wrote, I just broke up with my boyfriend, and I am heartbroken. I just need someone to talk to that wouldn't mind sharing screen names, and I also need someone to share their problems with. I don't know if there's anyone out there who doesn't have a best friend to turn to, but I need one. Just let me know if you're interested in sharing your stories. Obviously don't know a lot about this girl, but assume that she's going through a tough time right now. She's alone, doesn't have anyone to turn to, and in the absence of having someone that she can turn to and talk to, she just reaches out. Is there anyone out there in the whole wide world who would just talk to me right now? Got another one. This is what she writes. My husband and I are in the process of divorce, and I still love him. He left me to be with another woman who is married with 2 children, our children's age. He works in the oil field, so he works 12 on and 4 off, and on his days off, he gets the kids. It's the only time that he sees them. Well, last Saturday, when I took the kids to his mother's for their visit, he wanted me to stay. He told me that he was enjoying my company and then started to romance me. Well, I did something stupid and gave in. Now there's the possibility that I could be pregnant, and he is still with this other woman. I told him last night, and he told me that he would pay for an abortion. I do not want to have one. He tells me that it's hard enough with a 2 that he hardly gets to see, and 1 more would be that much harder. I started to cry, and he told me that he would call today. I do want to save my marriage, and I'm getting mixed signals from him. What do I do? Someone please help me. I need someone to talk to. Again, I would say in the absence of having someone to talk to, we have this deep felt human need that just